Welcome, Wildcats! Thank you for joining us this evening for our online career workshop, hosted by the University of Arizona Alumni Career and Professional Development Lab. I'm Aviva Dory, Project Specialist of the Alumni Career Lab, and broadcasting live from the beautiful UA campus in Tucson, Arizona. I'm excited for tonight's webinar, Workplace Communication, Keys to Career Success, presented by Debbie Lewisberg. Today's fast-paced, high-tech world requires solid communication skills to land jobs and promotions, supervise effectively, manage careers, and to simply get things done. Confidently speaking, attentively listening, and responding thoughtfully are keys to personal and professional success. By the end of this presentation, you will be able to determine which modes of communication work best in interviewing, networking, and negotiating. This webinar is part of a free Alumni Career webinar series from the Alumni Career Lab that provides monthly conversations with experts about a variety of industry and professional development topics. Today's presentation is being recorded, and it will be archived on the Alumni Association website for you to access on demand. Find a link to that and more at arizonaalumni.com/careers. Questions are welcome at any time during tonight's event. Type them into the chat box on the right side of your screen whenever you think of them. Debbie will answer questions at the end of the webinar. If you're on Twitter tonight, tweet at us about this webinar or other career topics by using the hashtag #HireACat. We'd love to hear from you. A little bit about our speaker. Debbie Lewisberg graduated from the U of A with a BA in Speech Communication. She is a consultant and career coach helping job seekers maneuver through the job market towards their next positions. She teaches and coaches job search and communication skills in person and via webinars regularly. A huge thanks to Debbie for taking the time to be with us and share her expertise with UA alumni tonight. Now I'll turn things over to Debbie, who will tell you a little bit more about herself and walk you through her presentation. Debbie?
Thank you, Aviva. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this evening. I'm so glad to be with you. As Aviva mentioned, I did graduate from the U of A with a degree in speech communication many, many years ago. And I found, though, that through my career, I started out in staffing, actually working for a small company in Tucson, and working through that and helping people with employment and getting hired and interviewing. And now with my work that I do in outplacement, which is assisting people that have been laid off that are in career transition, I have learned so much by being in the workplace and becoming myself a student of communication and noticing what makes me more effective, what makes groups more effective, what makes the teams I work with more effective. And it's become really one of my favorite topics to talk about. So it's been really my pleasure to put this together. It's been a great reminder for myself as well. So I look forward to walking you through our presentation tonight. Here's a look at our agenda. And as you were looking through some of these things we're going to talk about, major changes that have come about affecting communication, we're going to talk about modes of communicating. I worded it as Communication 101. And you're thinking, wait a second, this looks like basics. Well, you know, it is basics, and that's by design, because as I started thinking about workplace communication and how we move so quickly in the workplace, how we move so quickly through our day, through our weeks, through our careers, sometimes we don't take the time to refresh ourselves and remind ourselves of what our skills are and hone those skills and choose the things that are most appropriate for each situation. So that's just how I've designed it tonight, to kind of look at some basics, get some refreshers, think about where you are on the skill level and what kinds of things you might enhance or what things you feel you are exceptional at. And then we're going to look at some workplace situations, talk about some great communicators' traits, and then we'll wrap up with a recap and have some time for some questions, as Aviva mentioned. So let's go ahead and get started. And as we go through this presentation, keep in mind some of your workplace situations and think about the habits and maybe some of the communication practices that you have in place. And you might want to evaluate some of those and see if you need to shore up a little bit or see if you can become even more effective at those things that you already do. So let's get started by talking, first of all, about some of the major changes that have taken place. And I love to start this part of the conversation with this quote: "The more elaborate our means of communication, the less we communicate." And I love that because it's so meaningful. It was by a man named Joseph Priestley. He was a chemist and a clergyman. And take a look at this. He was from the 18th century. What in the heck was he talking about? They didn't even have telephones back then in the 1700s. So whatever he meant, there was something going on then that he thought things were changing and communication was being lost. Now think about us in the 21st century and how appropriate that is for what's going on in our world. So as we move in and talking about the major changes, of course, technology has been one of those. Just goes without saying that technology has just kind of sent everything on its ear. We've had to rethink a lot of things because of technology. So for one thing, the mobility that we have now, we not only have our cell phones with us all the time, we've got laptops, we've got devices, we've got tablets, we've got our watches now that we can use to talk and communicate. We've got the internet at our fingertips. We've got information abounding all over the place. We don't have to have a set of encyclopedias. Anybody remember a set of encyclopedias, or going to the library, or having to rely on an expert to give us answers? We can go out to the internet. We Google everything. We go to YouTube and learn how to do things ourselves. So that has really changed our need to communicate and then the ways that we communicate. I like this picture of this old phone too. It kind of reminds me, my family didn't have a phone exactly that old, but it reminds me that growing up, we had a landline sitting on the kitchen counter or the dining room counter. That was our only means of communication with people outside of our house, except for our neighbors that we saw face to face or went to school or went to work, and the U.S. mail. That was it. And then we had this phone that we could touch base and talk to people. Another major change that has affected, of course, and it does relate to technology, is social media. Look at how social media has increased our ability to connect with each other, and the ease in sharing information, the ease in sharing photos, reaching out to people. Have you been contacted by your high school friends or your alumni organization in your high school that's putting together a reunion, or people you haven't heard from in a while, relatives, etc.? What an easy way now to stay in touch and to share information. And then, of course, on social media, we're more apt to share images and videos and emojis. We communicate and convey our messages in images these ways now. When I am coaching and talking with people that are in job search and we come across social media, a lot of people are hesitant about incorporating social media into their job search. But by far, LinkedIn is the social media platform that people need to be on for finding that next job. That is the place where recruiters are going. So I always encourage people to get used to LinkedIn, learn all about LinkedIn, and then stretch out to the others if you're not familiar. I just learned the other night teaching a class to wedding planners who are putting together their own businesses. They go to Instagram and their clients go to Instagram. So it's important that we know that it is here to stay and we need to be comfortable with social media. Another big change has been, over the recent past, we have 4 generations of people working together now. We have what are called the traditionalists, and these are the folks that were born up to the year of 1945. So they could be in their early 70s and even older, still working. I know one of my husband's friends, his mom is well into her 80s, and she still works part-time. She wants to be active. She wants to be part of the community. We have baby boomers. Baby boomers were born between 1946 and 1964. That's a huge amount of our population. Then we've got our Generation X that was born from 1965 into the early 80s. And then we've got the millennial group that was born starting in the early 80s. So look at the changes or the differences in ages of people that we've got working side by side. I always tell people, think of your dinner table. Around the table on a holiday or some kind of celebration, and you've got maybe great grandma, and you've got granddad, and you've got an adult child, and then you've got the children of that adult child, and then maybe you've even got another generation of toddlers coming along. Think of the communication that's happening around that table and trying to understand each other, and great grandma is not understanding what the millennial great grandson is talking about when he mentions Bitcoin or social media or Instagram or Snapchat or Twitter. The same thing's happening in the workplace. We've got the older generation that may not be connecting with the younger generations because they're not talking the same language. And nothing is good or bad. It is just the way it is. And we have different styles, different strengths, and different preferences of all these people. And another point I want to make about the generations is we cannot make assumptions. Just because somebody looks like a grandma or a granddad and they've got gray hair and they've been around for a long time doesn't mean that they aren't a whiz kid when it comes to the internet or when it comes to posting pictures and information or having a blog or being on social media and tweeting or whatever it might be. Never make assumptions, because all of these skills run across the board throughout all of these generations. But it's something to be aware of because many people have different preferences and ways they prefer to communicate. You know, there's one more major change that I included in here, and it has to do with hearing loss. There are 48 million Americans reported to have, and that's about 20% of the population, with hearing loss. 60% of those are in the workforce or in educational settings. And those are only the people that have reported it. There's a huge stigma related to hearing loss, so people don't want to admit to it because it still has that stigma of being age-related. It's not. In fact, they're finding that baby boomers, people that are in their mid-50s starting to get into their 70s, they are the largest growing group with coming about with hearing loss. They were the first group of people to go to rock concerts and to wear headphones on their heads. So they are developing hearing loss sooner. And my point of adding this to the conversation about workplace communication is you may not realize that your coworker or your teammate or a person you supervise or anybody else that you run across in your day-to-day work activities may be suffering through with hearing loss and not be ready to talk about it. So if you feel that way, or if you feel there's something up with them, or they confide in you, then you've got to think about your communication with them as well. That's a whole other big topic out there. It's a huge concern out there in the health world and in the workplace as well. So those are just a few of the changes that have been happening out there. And with those 4 things in mind, think about some of the things that are occurring then within our communication. And take a look at this list here. This is just a sampling of some of the positives and negatives. Are they pros? Are they cons? Are they good? Are they bad? I think it depends on the situation. We definitely have less face-to-face. We don't need to be face-to-face anymore. We can conduct business through our phone at home. I work from home. I don't see anybody on a real regular basis unless I have projects outside. We get quick results, quick responses. We can text each other. We can get emails back and forth. That can be great. It can also be negative if we happen to hit that send button a little too soon. And we think about it the next day thinking, oh, I wish I'd said that a little differently. We can respond anywhere, anytime. Boy, that sounds convenient, but have you been out to dinner with your friends and they are checking their email or texting other people outside of the conversation that you're currently in? We have a constant flow of information. We're kind of seeing this decreased use of basic skills because we don't need to be face-to-face so much anymore. We've got shorter attention spans. We're using less language, and I've been seeing this a lot in cover letters and resumes, less good grammar even. There is a much more ease in multitasking, but is that necessarily a good thing? I don't think so, after having been a great multitasker for many, many years. It's not necessarily effective, nor is it necessarily very polite for me to be multitasking and not focusing on one thing at a time or one person. Our mental focus has changed. We've got numerous choices and a huge distribution or different distribution of information. I invite you to think of some other things that you've experienced or thought of or have happened to you related to the changes in communication. And feel free to type anything in the chat box. Aviva will be watching that for us and see what else that you can think of that has changed as far as communication goes, affecting how we talk to each other. The different ways we communicate. Boy, they are numerous. We have so many more choices. We don't just have that phone sitting on the kitchen counter anymore. We've got our cell phone in our pocket right next to us. We can email, we can text, we can instant message people, we can communicate with people through their blogs. I did that just recently. I subscribed to a blog and I wanted to comment on something that the writer said, and she got right back to me and we had a little conversation about it. You attend webinars like this. You chat in the chat box just like you are now. You're communicating. We still have faxes. I remember when faxes became so popular back in the 80s, and wow, what a great high-tech thing we had in our office. Well, we still use fax machines on occasion. I'm always a little surprised when I hear about faxes. Still happens. Sometimes they're through our computers. We have conference calls. We use social media, of course. We have online discussion groups. For instance, in LinkedIn, there are all kinds of discussion groups, including the U of A alumni groups have LinkedIn discussion groups you can chime in and be a part of. Voicemail. Sometimes I prefer to get their voicemail. I don't really want to talk to them even. I just want to leave them a quick message. We have video, we have Skype, we have FaceTime. And yes, we also still talk in person. We also still use the US mail, although very little. And sometimes we still use a landline, believe it or not. In fact, I don't even know if there still are actually landlines. I went to AT&T earlier this year to double check on what I thought was a landline in my house, because that used to be the best quality for webinars, and I conduct a lot of webinars. And they were not sure that I had a landline. In fact, most of the folks there working weren't even sure what a landline was. So some of these, though, are still in action. And look at all the choices. The point of this is to think about the variety and the choices that we have to make when we're looking at effective communication. Let's move on now and talk a little bit about communication skills. And I love this quote. Maybe you're familiar with this. I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. And that was actually said by this man. He was a spokesman for the U.S. Department of State back in the 1960s. He actually said this to a group of media, a group of journalists regarding the Vietnam War. And of course, back then there was a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion coming out about that particular war. And this is where this quote originated from. I think that this quote definitely applies to us in the 21st century now. Think of all the confusion, again, thinking about those different ages of people and the different generations, the different preferences, and all these choices that we have to make that's going on out there. Confusion, misunderstanding, things that go beyond the facts or kind of disregard the facts. Stories that people tell that are maybe just one perspective when there are many perspectives that we may not read about. All of that is hitting us at once. So it's important to take a look at making sure the communication that we're putting out there, the messages that we're conveying, are as clear as possible. And one of the 4 ways I've broken down our Communication 101 here is looking at something like our verbal skills. And yes, this looks like common sense, doesn't it? I don't know when the last time you took a class on communication was where you learned about verbal and nonverbal. It's been a long time for me, but because I teach this, I go back and I refresh myself on it and compile lists like this. It looks like common sense. However, I would add that it's not always common practice to think about these things. So when we're thinking of verbal skills, we're thinking of our vocabulary and the language that we use and how relevant that language is to our audience. Are we talking at a 5th grade level, or are we talking at a college level? Are we talking in positive terms, or are we talking rather negatively by the choice of the words that we use? Are we using terminology that maybe somebody outside of our industry doesn't understand, or different slang or different abbreviations that other people might not understand? Making our vocabulary, making our words relevant to our audience is so important. In fact, knowing your audience is one of the tenets of public speaking. You've got to know who you're talking to and where they're coming from so they can understand you and do what you're suggesting they do, or do what you are mandating that they do if you are their supervisor. The way we speak, also having things in common with people, using their names, speaking in, again, that common language that we can both understand, using concise and clear wording. Sometimes the fewer words make more sense than a bunch of words. Questioning, using questions to clarify, to invoke interest into our conversations, to bring people in. Encouragement, inviting people into our conversations, using tact and diplomacy in our choice of words, shows some kindness, fairness. And then confiding and sharing, being willing to be open, share our own stories so that we can relate to each other. With all of these changes that have been happening in the world, some of these things that I've shared with you, it's so important, again, to think about these verbal skills. And then on top of the verbal skills come the nonverbal skills. We are, again, moving so quickly that we've developed habits that we just rely on. But at some point in our careers, or some point in a situation, we might start thinking, I don't think this is working as well as it used to. I realized that because I used to go out and speak to a lot of groups, and I realized that the same stories I used to tell maybe weren't as relevant to my audience anymore. So I had to use a different choice of words or a different selection of information that they could relate to. And then coupling that with nonverbal skills, how it's being said, makes a huge difference as well. And we all know that nonverbal skills have to do with our body language, our posture, our movement, our expressions, making eye contact, connecting with another human being through the eyes. That is so important. Touch or handshakes. I know touch can be a little bit touchy out there in the workplace. I have a habit of touching people on the shoulder or reaching out and just kind of tapping them on the arm when I'm talking to them. It's my way of connecting. Having personal space. That's a field called proxemics that's within nonverbal communication. We all have a space about 1.5 feet or 2 feet away from us that is our space. We don't want people encroaching on that. And when they do, it sends a message, a nonverbal message that can make us very uncomfortable. I'm sure you've experienced this or seen it happen. I know I have. We have a personal space. We use our voice as part of our nonverbal toolkit as well. Our tone, our pitch, the way we sound, the way we enunciate. Some people turn up the end of their sentences as if it were a question. Maybe you've heard that. That sends a message about them. To me, that sends, it could be a couple of different things related to the situation. It could be relaying to me that they're not as confident when they turn up a statement into a question when it's not a question. Or perhaps they're opening up the discussion and they want to encourage your contribution. So we take away these messages and put it together with the verbal, the nonverbal, and we come up with what we think the message is. Silence, there's another very powerful tool that can be effective in so many situations, just being quiet and letting the other person talk. I like to think of this little list here as little power boosters, because 55% of our message is conveyed through nonverbal. That's a research study that's been around for a long time. Well over half of our message is through the nonverbal. So that doesn't mean, of course, that our words aren't important. They are very important, but they've got to be in sync with our nonverbal message. And when we choose a mode of communication, that is less than phone, less than voice, less than in person, less than eye contact, we're losing out on these little power boosters. Our message might not be conveyed as much as we would like it to be. So we might have to compensate in other ways if in person or voice is not possible. How many times have you been in that experience where somebody is sending you a nonverbal message that's confusing? I can think of one where I was telling a team member in my past about some things that needed to be done, and that person had their arms crossed, and they were kind of looking off in the distance, yet they were agreeing with me. And I wasn't sure if they got my message because that body language didn't match what they were saying. They were nodding their head like, yes, they were in agreement, but I sure wasn't getting the message by that body language. So that's when we've got to put these other things into play and go back and ask those questions. Do you understand? Do I need to clarify this for you? What's going on with you that I'm getting this mixed message? You know, there's another skill that I think is so important, and it is nonverbal, but it warrants its own slide or two here, and it has to do with listening. And here is yet another quote. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. And I found this amazing. It's from a Greek philosopher. Still holds true, doesn't it? Listening is so important. Think about how you have felt when you felt listened to, when you felt that somebody truly got you, somebody truly paid attention and responded to you. That's a great skill that we can all develop if we don't already have it. And it's called active listening. And basically, active listening means we are a participant, full participant in a conversation. We don't have any distractions. Our phone is away. We don't have any annoying sounds. We don't have anything going on that's going to distract us from listening to the person in front of us. And then we ask them questions, and we might rephrase to make sure that we're clear by saying things like, if I heard you correctly, this is what you are asking me, or this is what you said. Did I get that right? And we have a conversation back and forth. We interact with that person speaking by making sure we got their message. And then we can respond accordingly. We can do what they want us to do, or we can give them the results that they're asking for. So being an active listener, making sure our message was clear and understood and acted on, or that their message was acted on as we intended. Being a good listener is crucial to your success as a communicator, personally and professionally. We've all experienced that personally, I know. Here's another piece of information I wanted to share with you about listening. This is just a little self-assessment, and we're going to make this slide available to you as well as this whole PowerPoint, but I'm going to make this slide available to you because this is an important self-assessment to take yourself through and ask yourself, do I allow the speaker to finish their complete thought? Do I listen between the lines? Do I pick up on the most important details? Do I repeat back details to make sure I've got the understanding? Number 5, do I refrain from tuning out the speaker because I think their message is dull or boring, or I don't really know them or like them? Ouch. That might be happening. Do I avoid becoming hostile or excited when their views are different? Do I successfully ignore distractions when I'm listening? And do I indicate genuine interest in their conversation? So again, we've got these little self-assessment of 8 questions to share with you. But being a good listener, again, is going to help you be much more effective, especially in those crucial conversations. In fact, that's a great book that I've used over the years. It's called Crucial Conversations, and it's dealing with things that might be a little sticky in the workplace that take our attention. And this kind of listening is one of those skills that is so important. There's one more skill that I want to present to you, and this is my own personal addition to a list of skills, communication skills, and I think it is so important, and it is that of following through. It is not leaving things hanging. It's closing up a situation. It's coming back and making sure that everybody's satisfied, that the message was sent and what we wanted as an outcome is complete. So it's expressing thanks or appreciation after a job well done, or just coming back and being grateful to someone. That's a huge, powerful component of communicating, is letting somebody know we appreciated them. Asking the next question, that's something else I think is so important. Instead of just thinking after someone's made a statement, maybe somebody in the workplace has said, okay, and here's what's going to happen next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. And instead of just thinking, oh, I wonder what that means. Oh, I wonder how that will turn out. It's asking, okay, what's our role in that? Or why at 4 o'clock next Tuesday? Or what did you mean when you said that? It's asking the next question for clarity. It's not assuming, it's asking. It's getting yourself clear on understanding what they're talking about. It's circling back, full circle again, to say, did I do what you wanted me to do? Did I meet your expectations? Did this turn out the way you had planned? Is there anything else we need to do to make this complete? I also tell people, especially when it comes to following through and following up after an interview, don't wait for other people to contact you. Take the lead. Get on the phone. Send that email. Contact the person. What's happening? I'm really interested in this job. I'd like to know where I stand. And then that last point there, ask for feedback. This is a very professional, powerful, brave thing to do, is ask for feedback, and you've got to be ready for the response. So asking your team lead, how did I perform on that job? What's your assessment, or what's your evaluation, or give me some feedback on my performance. Or very bravely is for an interviewer to ask the person, or the interviewee to ask the interviewer, how did I do? Why didn't you choose me? Can you give me some feedback? I had somebody tell me he did that not long ago. He said to the person interviewing, do you think that I'm the right match for this job? Do you see that I'm the right person? And that person said, no, actually, I don't see that. But they had an upside to that. They said, however, we've got another position that we think you'd be better suited for. And then they could have a conversation about that. So it kind of brings all this together, asking that next question, asking for feedback, and being ready. Being ready for feedback that's going to help us grow and help us improve and be better communicators. Let's talk about some of these workplace situations, and what I've done after kind of refreshing us on the skills and what's needed out there in the workplace is I've put together about 9 workplace scenarios. And again, I have a great quote. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. And that was by George Bernard Shaw, very popular quote from the early 1900s. And again, still holds true here. Unless we ask, unless we go back, follow through, unless we work through some of these situations that we encounter in the workplace very professionally, we might not be walking away thinking that our message was clearly understood. We have the illusion that it's taken place. So let me take you through these 9 scenarios here. And what I've done is I've put together what I think are the most important skills and the most important modes of communication. And of course, they're very general because I don't have any one particular environment in mind. But as we go through these, you might think of your own workplace situation, and you might agree or disagree. But do take some of these things and evaluate and think if they might be something you'd like to add or something that could enhance your interviewing situations, for instance. So interviewing, eye contact, crucial. Having upright posture, sending that message with that body language that I am here, I'm interested in this job. Having clear and concise answers. Here's a place where too many words will confuse the situation. Having relevant examples that pertain to the job, that help that person see that you're the right candidate for the job. And then there's that follow through, making sure that you have gone back and found out, do you need any more information from me? May I stay in touch with you? May I connect with you on LinkedIn? Could I find out why I was not chosen for this job? Ideally, interviews are done in person, but they're also done via phone, of course, and many times video conferencing as well. Handling conflict, some of the skills that need to be in play when we are looking at managing conflict, maybe acting as an intermediary between some team members that aren't getting along, or trying to diffuse a situation definitely we've got to have some tact and diplomacy. We've got to be good listeners, and we've got to be willing to ask questions to get clear, not to take sides, but to get clear on what's going on here. Help me understand. And usually the best way to handle conflict, of course, is in person on a one-on-one basis. I've been in situations where maybe there have been two unhappy parties, meeting with them one at a time, getting each position. We could use video conferencing, again, one-on-one if distance is an issue. A phone call might be something too. If they can't see us in person and we can't see them in person, then a phone call. But these kinds of things ideally are handled in person, face-to-face, when you're trying to manage through a conflict. How about managing change? Let's say there is a big change coming through the workplace and there's going to be a layoff or a possible reorganization and relocation. Handling that change with our vocabulary and some empathetic words, showing that we understand, giving clear, concise messages, inviting questioning, and accessibility. I think that's openness, that skill of being open. Saying, hey, I'm available if you've got other questions. Come and ask me. We're trying to work through all the details now. And then sharing that in person, in a group, or even one-on-one or over the phone. I have heard horror stories about change, especially related to people's employment, being delivered through a voicemail or being delivered through an email. That is so impersonal and unkind, as a matter of fact. In fact, that reminds me of a guideline. One of the best guidelines I know when you're choosing the way to communicate is to think of the more personal the communication, the more it might hit home to somebody, like their employment, the more personal your mode of communication needs to be. And then on the other side, if it's a very impersonal type of communication, just disseminating information out to an organization, it can be an impersonal mode. That's okay. But there's a good guideline to think, how personal is this? How sensitive might this information be? Therefore, my way of communicating may not be as quick as I would like it, but it may be the best way. In other words, to do it in person, make the time for a one-on-one meeting, etc. Let's take a look at a few more. Negotiating. This could be negotiating a contract or negotiating a salary. Having the skill of clarity, being open to discussion, again, listening, being open to questions, asking questions, that next question, and then using silence is a very powerful tool when negotiating, letting the other person come out with their next compromise or with their next viewpoint. Negotiating can ideally be done in person, email, phone. I'm thinking of negotiating employment offers, etc. Collaborating, working in a team with other people, definitely have to have a common language, a common vocabulary. Got to look at each other in the eyes as best you can. Maybe you're across the country or international, but having a video conference at least so you can see each other. Having clarity, tact, knowing that you're dealing with maybe different cultures, maybe different generations, probably different generations. Being open to sharing and listening, dealing with your team in person or video, seeing each other, at least initially, having those initial in-person or video kinds of connections. And then sure, you go into phone conversations and then you go into email conversations, etc., however you need to do. But initially, I think in-person is always best. Customer service, another one. Listening, empathy, having ownership in your words, letting them know, I can take responsibility for this. I can help you with this. I will help you with this. Using a soothing voice. All those things are very helpful in dealing with customers, especially customers that are upset, and dealing with them in person, face-to-face, phone, even email. When I receive an email about something I've reached out to a company on that maybe I wasn't happy with, and I get an email back, a personal email, that makes me feel better. A phone call, sure, that'd be fine too. But if I want to go to the store and I can talk to the manager or talk to someone and they can give me those kinds of skills as well in person, and I can see them, we can talk to each other and connect and solve a problem. Last set of 3 here, presentations. Your vocabulary. I mentioned earlier that a tenet principle of presentations or public speaking is to know your audience. You want to have common ground with that audience. You want to have common language. You want to have eye contact. You want to use your voice. You can use your body language, your movement, especially if you're speaking in person or you're up on a stage or you're making a presentation to a small group or teaching a class. All of those things matter in person. Video, audio conferences, webinars, another way of presenting. I do a lot of webinars, so I've learned that I'm not using video, of course, in most cases, but I can use my voice and I can use common language and I can talk about things that we can all relate to. Coaching employees, again, vocabulary, listening, encouraging. Maybe you're in a performance coaching situation or you're mentoring somebody, using tact and kindness. In person, one-on-one, video, phone. And then finally, building relationships and networking. Very important to our success in our careers is building relationships. And networking is all about that. It's building a mutual connection with people. And it's so important in job seeking as well. Being open, asking questions, being curious about people, listening, personalizing, making eye contact, sharing. And this, of course, can be done. Ideally, networking, when I'm talking to job seekers, is done in person. It's going out and meeting those people. It can be done over the phone. Sure, it can be done over email and social media. I always tell job seekers to try to get to in person. Try to get to meeting the person face to face so that you can build a relationship. So those are just 9 scenarios that I came up with. Of course, there are going to be more, but these are just some ideas. And my point here is to get you thinking about your situations and thinking about the skills that are needed and the mode of communication to build your effectiveness. And here, finally, a modern day quote. Awareness is the greatest agent for change. And this is a timeless quote, actually. You can't unknow something that you just heard about. So, sorry, I brought to your attention all these communication skills. Now it's time for you to put them into practice or to revamp them or to enhance those that are already good so that you can be better and more effective at your communication situations. And here's a quick list of some ideas when you're looking at whatever your situation is, be it an interview, be it a conversation with somebody whose performance is not up to standard, or dealing with a vendor or renegotiating a contract. Take the time to evaluate and plan. Think about what that situation is and think about what your desired outcome is. What do you want to happen? What would be the best case scenario? That kind of relates to visualization. If any of you are familiar with that, that's a powerful, powerful tool that athletes have always used. Visualizing winning that next match or making that touchdown or hitting that home run or whatever it might be. Visualization is powerful. We can do the same thing. We should do the same thing when it comes to communicating. Knowing what we want, and then thinking about the audience and making our choices accordingly so we can connect with them. Practice and role-playing these situations. If you've got a tough conversation coming up, this could relate to home as well. Doing a role play, practicing, video yourself using your phone, do an audio, listen to your voice, practice. You also want to use that follow-through to ensure that your outcome, your desired outcome is reached. Circle back. What else needs to be done? Did it happen the way you wanted it to? Was there a surprise in there you didn't think about? What can you do to reconnect and recommunicate to make sure things turn out? And then just a final reminder on that. Continue to sharpen your skills at every turn. And I think that when you're walking into workplace situations and you do something like this list, maybe this little checklist, do a little debrief with yourself and ask yourself, how did it go? Did I plan enough for this? What happened? Did I get the outcome I wanted? Did I use the right language for this particular situation, this particular audience? Did I practice enough? And what else can I do to make sure it turns out satisfactorily? And that way you keep honing those skills and you keep getting better and better. None of us are going to be 100% wonderful, awesome communicators all the time, There's always going to be something that throws us off, and there are always going to be those things that we excel at. We are human beings, and we have a lot of complex things that factor into our interactions. I see some questions over in the box, and I will make sure to get to those before we wrap up here. I've got just a couple more things I want to share with you. One of those being thinking about great communicators. And just in your mind, just on your own right now, see if you can think of somebody in your life that you would consider a great communicator. And this is a list of what I've put together, what I think comprises a great communicator. I think great communicators are exceptional listeners. Hands down, they are great listeners. They put everything else aside to listen to me, to sit with me face to face if I need that, or to be concerned and show their interest in what I'm talking about. That is an exceptional communicator. They take ownership. I mentioned that a minute ago. They are responsible for their words. They tell me if they can help me, and if they can't. They are truthful and honest. They take ownership. They say thank you. They're not afraid to express their appreciation, their gratitude. They ask questions. They want to know more. They don't assume things. They go back and make sure that they're clear. They remember things too. I think some of my favorite conversationalists or communicators are those that remember things about me. That always makes me feel good when they come back and say, hey, how did it turn out last month? You said you were having a meeting with a certain company at for a contract. How did it turn out for you? Or how's your dog? You told me that you got a new puppy. How's that working out? How are your kids? What's going on with you? They personalize, they use my name, they use the names of people or things we have in common. They show empathy, they show that they're concerned, that they care, and they share of themselves. They share their stories. Storytelling is something you might hear a lot about in the workplace right now. It's very important to share our experiences with each other. That way we connect. I can say, oh, Aviva's had that experience. I can relate to that. And she can relate to me, and maybe we can solve this problem together. And I think great communicators encourage conversation, and that's sometimes done with that questioning. So when I'm thinking about great communicators, of course, the famous people come up. Ronald Reagan was considered a great communicator, John F. Kennedy, Winston Churchill. But think about things or people in your own life. So I thought about my dad, and I thought about one of my friends. She's in her 90s. And what I know about those two people is they weren't afraid to ask me questions. And sometimes it would be a little, put me on the spot a little bit, but they would say, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Tell me more. They would, of course, personalize. They knew what was going on with me. They would share their own experiences. They would be tactful. They would encourage me to talk more. So think about those people that you consider great communicators that might be worth emulating, that might be role models for you. And in the process, you might realize that you are a role model for somebody else with your great communication skills. We are winding up here, and I want to take you through a brief recap here, and then we're going to get to your questions. I want you to remember all the choices we have out there. We have different communication styles and modes and needs of different people. We have the awareness now that we've got to know our audience. We've got to ask questions of who they are, what do they need, what information are they seeking, what kind of communication style is going to work best for them. We've got to make wise choices then in our words and our modes of communication. Again, remembering that guideline that the more personal or sensitive the situation, the more personal our way of communicating needs to be. Keeping in mind our skills wherever we are can be improved upon, or we can always learn. We've got to keep evaluating ourselves and thinking if things are still working for us in a communication manner. Matching our nonverbal with the verbal and being good listeners. That can truly make all the difference in a relationship. If you put down that phone and turn off the TV and close the door and pay attention to that person that wants to talk, that has something to say. Prepare, practice, especially for those sticky situations, those crucial conversations that might be coming up. And then, of course, following up and following through. That brings me to the end of our presentation. So I'm going to check in and see what questions we've got here. Aviva has put them over here in a chat box. So let me go through. A major change in communication is due to globalization, which introduces cross-cultural communication. Absolutely true. Absolutely. So we're finding that we are on a team with someone who's across the world, not just across the country or down the hall, but maybe from another country, and they've got a different culture. In fact, I'm working with a group of people right now that are in job transition, and they are truly from different countries, and they have different cultures. And it's important to remember that and to maybe do a little research ahead of time. Remember, we have all this information of how is it best to communicate with this person based on where they're from. And that's what I mean about taking the lead. Don't wait for them to be a good communicator. You have a knowledge, or you have an awareness now that you're dealing with somebody from a different culture. Now you've got to do what you can to be a good communicator with them. Okay, here's another question about workplace mentoring. This person is being mentored to develop some software development skills with weekly one-on-ones in person. At some of these sessions, I don't know what questions to ask about what I'm learning. Do you have any tips for developing questions about dense subject matter on the fly? Great question. And that is so awesome that you have one-on-one mentoring. I love hearing that. That is so important. And if any of you ever get the chance to be a mentor or take part in a mentoring program, do so. So when it comes to asking questions like that, and I love the way you worded that, on the fly, when you have these one-on-one meetings, maybe the questions aren't coming as easily because you're just not that familiar yet. Or maybe there's a little ice that needs to be broken between you and the mentor. Maybe you need to go back and build that relationship a little bit. Sometimes that can be the difference too. You've got to have a rapport with that person, be able to connect, be able to talk the same language. And if you feel like, and I'm speaking from experience here, if I'm talking to somebody that I see as a mentor and I feel like their skills are way above mine, and I don't want to embarrass myself by asking what I think might be an elementary question, maybe I need to go back and have a little heart-to-heart with that person and say, hey, I really want to make this work, and I really want to have good questions to ask you. Here's what's hanging me up a little bit. So there's where I think another great skill comes into play, that openness, not being afraid to ask them point blank. I tell people to do this during interviews, is to go back and ask, I wanted to go back and clarify something that I said to you, or I want to ask you about something that I'm confused about. So maybe it's not time yet to come up with those questions on the fly. Maybe you need to get comfortable with that mentor. Maybe you need to get more comfortable with the subject matter. And between meetings, maybe you can do a little studying. So you don't want this mentoring to be a stressful situation for you. You want it to be a positive, effective situation for you. So those are some ideas I have. Thank you for that question. That's a great, important question. I would go back and take a look at that relationship you have with that person right now. Another question. Has digitization, that's hard to roll off the tongue, digitization compromised one-on-one public speaking capabilities of individuals to a certain extent? How can we adapt to this change and excel in both of these communicating mediums? Absolutely. I believe it has compromised the one-on-one, but I am hopeful that by us now being aware of these skills and being able to mentor each other and being able to utilize some of these skills, that we can excel ourselves and also spread the word. But yes, it's easy to think about and just look around, seeing people with their heads down and looking at their phones. And I've been in meetings where we're sitting around a conference table and I'm excited to be there. We're working on a project, but people are looking at their phones and answering their emails. And it just kind of takes away from the effectiveness of being one-on-one. Public speaking, I think that is becoming something that we don't see quite as much emphasis on anymore. In fact, if any of you are familiar with Toastmasters, Toastmasters is an organization built around helping you build your presentation skills. And I've noticed that I'm not a member any longer, but I've noticed that they've kind of changed their focus. They've had to incorporate some of these changes into their speaking. So sometimes it's not always in person. So it may be more emphasis on voice and on using video cameras and that kind of thing. So absolutely, there's been an effect, I believe, on our one-on-one skills. And we're going to adapt the best way we can. And, you know, sometimes I think that that means looking at a situation and being adamant about what we think the right mode of communication is. Again, the more personal the situation, the more personal the mode of communication should be. So setting our own examples there. Any other questions?
We have time for just one more question, guys. So if you have any questions, now's the time.
Okay.
Okay, that's all
I'm going to give you one more
questions that we have. I'd like to thank Debbie so much for taking the time. If she wants to just go over her last slide, and then I'll just wrap it up.
Okay, great. I want to leave you with one more quote. Of course, I love these communication quotes, and here it is. Communication, the human connection, is the key to personal and career success, and that is so true. And by being aware and taking a look at your skills and where you are on the spectrum and what you can improve upon, and being an advocate for good communication is so important. You can get out there and be a mentor and be successful and be a role model for somebody else. So again, it's been my pleasure. I've been so excited to put this together for you and to talk to you about one of my favorite topics. My email address is right here on the screen. If any of you would like to send me a question, I'd be happy to talk further with you about some of your individual topics. And again, Aviva, I think you said that this PowerPoint, and again, slide number 12, I think it was, is going to be available, as well as the recording. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a good rest of your evening. Thanks, Aviva.
Thank you so much, Debbie. We really appreciate it. And just a heads up for everyone, you will be receiving an email from us with the survey on there. So if you could take the time to just fill that out and let us know how much you liked Debbie's presentation, we would really appreciate it. And as mentioned, that rubric and these slides will be mailed out to you as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight, and have a good one. And we'll see you next month for our webinar called The Power Hijack. All right. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks so much.